And we have been discussing the sixth chapter here of Kohelet of Ecclesiastes, where King Solomon is discussing or continuing to discuss the idea of wealth and the troubles and the potential issues that can arise with wealth. Okay, as again, we saw in the last chapter, he discussed how wealth gets you used to a certain lifestyle. And if a person loses it, that's one issue that comes up, the issue of having to adapt to new realities. But here he's been discussing more what happens if a person does not find satisfaction from wealth. And that's a key point over here, that in order to gain anything from your wealth, you're going to have satisfaction. Okay, what he calls sova, that's the Hebrew word for satisfaction. Okay, similar, we use that word also in other places. For example, it says that Abraham, at the end of his life, that he was Avraham Zakein Usva Bayamim. He was old but satisfied in his days. Okay, so that's another case where that term comes up. So without any further ado, let me go into the screen share. We can all check this all out together. Okay, give me 1 second to get my screen set up here. Okay. All right, so what we saw last week was verse 1 and verse 2, where he kind of set up the case. He said, there's an evil that I have seen under the sun, which is highly, either very common or it's highly destructive, right? That was his first thing that he said in the first verse. And the second verse, he set up our case for us. He said, if a person has wealth and property and influence, so he said honor, which is influence, and misses nothing from their lives. Everything they want, they can have at the snap of a finger, but still, what they lack is the control to have any sort of they're not able to enjoy it themselves. Somebody else consumes the good that they have. Even though they have the ability to have whatever they want, it's somebody else who's actually consuming the goodness that they have. We said that is both hevel, that's our go-to word, our hevel, but it's also chalira, a bad sickness. And I thought more about what I said last week, and I think I was right about that. In the fact that there's a sickness. A sickness typically happens when a person their health deteriorates over time, or because of some sort of issue. A bad sickness would be something that happens out of the norm. So a person's perfectly healthy and then they're sick. So I think our example last week of a cancer would be a great comparison over here. We're talking about somebody who's healthy, except for the fact that they're very sick. Besides for their sickness, they're healthy. And so that's the same thing over here. Besides for all the wealth is there, all the pieces are in place for them to achieve happiness with their wealth, but they're not getting it. And we said that's because God is not allowing them to achieve it. Okay, so we're going to have to kind of address that issue. But before that, he gets into this discussion. And that's what we saw. We started to see last week with verse number 3, and I'm just going to start this all over again, verse number 3, so that we can get a good flow of it again. And he says like this. Let's start from the beginning. Again, this is chapter 6, verse number 3. He says, if this person gives birth to 100 children, okay, so expecting that children would be a marker of happiness, of ability, of whatever that is. Okay, so if a person were to give birth to 100 children, v'shanim rabot yichya, and live for many years, v'rav sheyichyu yemei shanav, and there's a multitude to the days of their lives. Okay, so it's not just the years that they live, but they don't have just a long life, but their years are technically full. Right? They have all these experiences. Nevertheless, v'nafsho lo tisba min hatova, their soul is not getting satisfaction from the goodness. Okay, soul would not be a perfect translation. Nefesh is really more of a spirit. We find that nefesh tends to be a little more human than the soul, the concept of the soul that you think of. It's your life force more. So their life is not satisfied from the goodness. V'gam kivura lo hoyetalo. The person also does not achieve any burial. Now that's an interesting discussion. What he's trying to bring up with this burial over here. In this case, Amarti, I would say, Solomon is saying, I would say myself, Tov mimenu hanafel, that better than that person is the stillborn, right? A child who does not survive into childbirth. Okay, so again, let me read it all as one flow again. In Yolid Ishmeah, if this person were to give birth to 100 children, Mishanim Rabot Yechia, and live for many years, V'rav Shehu Yemei Shanav, and there's a multitude of days of their lives, which I'm understanding is again that they have a fullness. They're active. They're doing things in the days of their years. V'nafsho lo tispa min hatova, but they're not achieving any satisfaction from the goodness. V'gam kivura lo hayatalo. And also they do not have a burial. They do not merit a burial, whatever it is. Amarti, I would say, better than that person is the stillborn. So again, that's a pretty heavy piece. He's saying that a stillborn, a child who never actually experiences life, is better off than this person who has all these life experiences, again, has all the pieces in place, and on paper seems to be having a great time. That person is actually, because of the fact that they're not achieving Sova, again, that's this root word over here, this shoresh, Sova, they're not achieving satisfaction, then the stillborn is living a better life. Now, that's a hard piece to unpack. And we're going to have to take that, and he's going to flesh that out in the following 2 verses, okay? 2-3 verses. So we're going to see that as we continue, why he says that. He has to kind of bring a proof to what he's saying. That's what he's going to do in the following verses, okay? But on this verse over here, I think there's just 1 or 2 things to point out. So I already pointed out that there's a difference between living many years and having a multitude of days of the years. Okay, Yemei Shanav means the days of the years. My understanding is, I remember hearing this somewhere. I don't remember exactly where this comes from, but when the verses refer to the years of your life, that's literally the years of your life. If a person merits to live a long life, wonderful, right? But then there's also the days of the years, Yemei Shanav or Yemei Shnei Chayav, right? We have that term show up a lot of times, the days of the years of the life. And the idea would be in that case, my understanding is that it's one thing to live a long time, but it's also a different thing what you do with time that you have. So it's important for a person, there's a difference between a person living a long time but not actually doing anything with that time, or actually having full days of their lives as opposed to just years of their lives. Full days of their lives means every day they're achieving new experiences. And so that's actually pretty harsh over here. We're talking about somebody who, again, has daily experiences which should fulfill them, but they're blocked. They're not achieving that because of lo tispa min hatova. They're not achieving any sort of satisfaction from the good that they have. So that's an interesting. That's again setting up our case over here. It adds a whole nother level to not only do they have money, not only do they have influence, not only do they have power, not only do they have all these things, but they're actually living lives that, again, on paper would be perfectly, happy, enjoyable lives. But it's not. For some reason, it's not. They're not achieving satisfaction. And tacked onto that is this gam kivura lo hayatalo. They also do not have burial. The way I kind of look at this is it's hard to figure out why that line is here in the verse. Either he's saying that we're talking about literally a case where a person does not achieve burial, right? So they have this full life, but they never, as soon as they're gone, nobody takes the time to take care of them and put them to rest. So even with all the goodness that they've achieved in their life, or again, on paper they achieved in their life, no one cared about them. No one cared about them to the point to put them to rest after they were gone. So even with all the influence, all the power, that would be gam kavura lo hayatalo. They don't achieve burial. In fact, the rabbis on this verse connect this to the story of Ahab, Achav, the king of Israel, Ahab, who not the sailor, not Captain Ahab, but King Ahab of the kingdom of Israel. Moby Dick happens to be my favorite book in the world, so that's why I had to throw that in there. But the King Ahab, who had everything he wanted, not only did he have everything he wanted, he had everything everybody else wanted. He stole things. He used the power of the kingship to take property that didn't rightfully belong to him. He did whatever he wanted. Anything he wanted, he could get. And nevertheless, at the end of his life, he did not achieve burial. He dies in a freak accident, as does his wife, and they don't get buried. I don't remember what happens to his body. His wife's body gets eaten by dogs. His evil wife Jezebel, or Jezebel in Hebrew. Okay, so so that's a great kind of correlation over here, or comparison. You have somebody who has on paper has everything that they can ask for, everything that they want, everything that anybody else would also want. They're living the best life on paper, but they at the end of their lives, they haven't achieved satisfaction. They haven't even achieved burial. Nobody cared for them after everything was done. And so that's kind of a great, it's a lesson for all of us, but it's kind of interesting to see how the rabbis connected to a real life case of King Ahab. So what we have over here is, again, King Solomon telling us this whole story, this whole picture that we've seen. Better than that person is the stillborn. Okay, a life without satisfaction is an empty life. The person's living, he's a zombie, basically. The person would be a zombie living a life of death, right? The person is living a life just heading towards one direction. So, as we like to say, we don't want to just look at Kohelet as a book of sadness. So he's not just telling us, this is a terrible thing. Life sucks because of this. What he's leading us to a lesson that we can take away with us. Okay, and so we'll see that in the coming verses right over here. All right. So without any delay, let us turn to verse number 4. And verse number 4 and verse number 5 say two opposite things, but they work together in tandem over here. And verse number 4 says like this: Ki, because vahevel ba. We're talking about the stillborn now. All right, so we're comparing our case to the case of a stillborn. So he says, what's the case of a stillborn? The child who never lives, who dies in childbirth, or as they're being born. So in that case, the case is they come in hevel. Again, hevel being mist or smoke or something they come with no practical abilities. Uvachoshech yelech, and they disappear in darkness. They go away in darkness. Uvachoshech, and in the darkness, shemo yechuseh, their name is covered. Okay, their whole history, their name, which would be their history, is covered. Okay, but that's a pretty bleak reality. But unfortunately, that is the case of the stillborn. A child does not have a chance to live, so that child comes in commotion, confusion, I would say, disappears in darkness, and in the darkness, their name is covered. Okay. In fact, I don't think I would have to look back at this, but I don't remember if we give a name to a child that never lives in Jewish tradition. I don't know if we name the child. I would have to look. I would have to look that up to be sure, but that would be my understanding. So again, let's read the verse again. Kiva hevel ba, this child, the stillborn, comes in hevel, again in this steam or this nothingness or nearly nothingness. Uvachoshech yelech, and goes away in darkness. Uvachoshech shmo yechuseh, and their name is covered in darkness. Okay, kasa, the shorish, the root word there, chaf samach hey, means to be covered. Okay, can't think of a great example from liturgy, but we have it is a common root word again. So the child's name is covered in darkness. So that, again, very bleak. What we have over here is, again, the Nephel, this stillborn, never goes through pain. And that's kind of what I think this verse is kind of trying to tell us. If you think about the stillborn never has to deal with anything, with any troubles, with any trials or tribulations. They come, they go, they're gone. Okay, which is an interesting. We look at that as sad, but at the same time, there's an interesting element to it. The child never has to deal with troubles. The child came and went and was I don't want to say forgotten, but their name is covered in darkness. So in that sense, it's almost like you can feel comfort for this child because the child never had to deal with anything. They came, they went. They never had to deal with the painful parts of life. On the contrary, or on the flip side, we're going to look at verse number 5 over here, and that's going to say, kind of sing a different tune. I'm reading these verses together because they're short and they really read together. Not only does the child come and go in darkness, but also gam shemesh lo ra'ah, they also don't get to see the sun. V'lo yada nachat lazeh mizeh, and they're not able to discern pleasure from this one to this one. And that we'll discuss that in just a second. So let me read that once again. Gam shemesh lo ra'ah, the child never sees the sun. V'lo yada, and does not know, or does not have the ability to know, to discern, of nachat, of pleasure or joy, lazeh mizeh, for this one from them. Okay, so before we discuss what the verse is talking about, let's just discuss this phrase over here. Lo yada nachat lazeh mizeh. They do not now able to achieve, to understand pleasure from this to this, or to this from this, right? Literally. Okay. My understanding of that was that in order for a person to have any understanding of pleasure, we have to have it has to be a contrast, right? If you're living a life where just everything is good, it's hard to realize that you're enjoying everything so much. But when you see the opposite, when you see the potential for there to be not good, and you are experiencing good, pleasure, joy, so in that case, then you have the ability to really understand how much pleasure you're going through. It's kind of like when we have a contrast in a food, right? If you just had straight sweetness, everything you ate was just sweet, it wouldn't be that enjoyable, right? We think, children particularly think, they want everything to be sweet, right? You just eat candy. If you just ate candy all day, so there would be a level of enjoyment there. At first, you would have some enjoyment, but without experiencing other experiences, without having a little bitter or spicy or sour or salty, you wouldn't have a full pleasure experience. So in order to have an experience of pleasure, a person has to have contrast in their lives. And that's one of the things that this child, this Nephel, this stillborn, never experiences, is the ability to experience pleasure through the contrast. Lazeh means that, to experience what I'm getting pleasure from, this versus that. The theme of this verse over here, verse number 5, is that the stillborn, while they don't suffer like we saw in the last verse, they don't get a chance to suffer anything. So we should look at them, we should be jealous of the stillborn. They never get a chance to suffer. But at the same time, they also never get a chance to enjoy. They never get a chance to see the sun. Right? That's, of all the simple pleasures in life, I don't know if there's quite anything like a beautiful ray of sunshine when you're not expecting it, or after a rainy, Portland winter, when the sun finally comes out. There's something that's an extreme level of joy to be able to see the sun. And this stillborn, this child, while you may be jealous of the fact, that they never have to deal with taxes or or stubbing their toe or anything like that, but at the same time, they also never get a chance to enjoy the things around in the world. They never get a chance to see the sun. They never get a chance to try different foods, right? I think that's kind of a good example. They never get a chance to taste all the different foods available. And so in that case, they are severely lacking, because yes, they might not experience pain, but they also never get a chance to experience pleasure. And really, I think that's the idea that he's going to be bringing out here, and particularly, as we'll see in the next verse, is that the ability to experience, to feel pain and to feel pleasure are very connected. They're very related. They are, if any, it really, to put it simply, they're one and the same thing. To be able to feel let me put it like this, to have the awareness and the cognizance to experience pleasure, a person also has to have their mind, their senses open to the experience of feeling pain. Those two things are, by their nature, interconnected. And the stillborn, that's our case of somebody who never gets to do either of them. So if we were to look at it, oversimplify it, they never have to experience pain. Great, that's a wonderful thing. But they also never got a chance to experience pleasure. And the two things, again, are intertwined. In our case over here, is if you have somebody who has everything going on well in life, but they're unable to experience pleasure. So their life is similar to that of the Nephil, is similar to that of the stillborn, and the fact that they've clearly closed themselves off from all sensation, from the ability to feel anything. They're numb, is basically what we're coming to. The comparison here to the stillborn is you have somebody who has, again, on paper, everything's working, but they're not feeling anything because they're not feeling anything. They're avoiding and numbing themselves to everything, and that's why they're not able to achieve pleasure. Let's see this as he plays it out in verse number 6. He's going to kind of make this idea pop a little bit more. And he says, V'ilu, and if it were, Chaya elef shanim, that the person lived for 1,000 years, Pa'amayim, twice, to 2,000 years, V'tova lo ra'ah, they would never see goodness. Why? Or let me not why. I'm sorry. Let me reread that. I made a mistake. Let me read that one more time. V'ilu chaya. Let's say you had the stillborn. Let's discuss the stillborn. Let's say you had the stillborn. If they lived for elef shanim pa'amayim, for 1,000 years twice, so 2,000 years, v'tova lo ra'ah. But if they still lived with this kind of lifestyle of not seeing darkness and not seeing light, they would never see good. They would never see goodness in their lives. Halo el makom echad hakol holech. And at the end of the day, everything is going to the same place. That means both. This is kind of tying it back to, from the case of the stillborn, tying it back to this wealthy person. They're all going to the same place at the end of the day. So again, a great example of where the book of Kohelet definitely comes off at first glance as something that is depressing. But my argument over here is that he's actually trying to bring to us an empowering lesson. And that is that if you find yourself struggling to achieve satisfaction with things in your life, if you can't taste the goodness that you have, then perhaps you're not allowing yourself to taste the bitter also at the same time. In order to open yourself up to living a full life experience that includes the good parts, the pleasant parts, the pleasure that surrounds you, a person also has to at least open themselves up for the ability, for the possibility for them to achieve some sort of they have to open themselves up for the possibility to feel discomfort, to feel pain, to feel the darker parts of life. Because you can live a life like a stillborn, right? You can live a life where you don't see darkness, you don't see anything bad go on in your life, but you're also not going to see goodness. You're not going to see any pleasure. You're not going to see any. You're not going to enjoy the things that you're doing, right? So you can live a life of a stillborn for 2,000 years, but you'll still never see goodness. And at the end of the day, both of those people are going to the same place. The stillborn who never gets a chance to live, and the wealthy person who, again, lives for 2,000 years, but never gets a chance to enjoy the things that they have. they're going to the same place. Again, that just means that in the end of the day, they're going to have lived however long they've lived, but they're never going to have achieved, or they're never going to have experienced the pleasure, because they're numbing themselves from all experience. I think this is I think personally that this is a very meaningful lesson, because it's so easy for us to numb ourselves. There are things in this world that we don't want to see, we don't want to experience, we don't want to have anything to do with. But when we close off our senses and close off our ability to see things, we close off our ability to see the good things too. Now, obviously, we have to balance ourselves. We can't only see the bad thing. Only seeing the bad things would be not a good life, also. But it's to live a life where you're just numb. You're not going to experience good or bad. You're not going to experience anything. I think it's interesting that we're getting to this verse now. So now we're in the 3 weeks leading up to Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of Av, which is the national day of mourning for the Jewish people. And so these 3 weeks are now we're 2 weeks away. So now it's this time where sadness is kind of on our minds. You know, it's we, as the Talmud tells us, that once we enter the month of Av, we decrease in sadness. So the Rosh Chodesh, the first day of the month of Av, is actually going to be on Friday. And there's a halachic aspect to that, things that you are or not allowed to do. But there's also kind of a sense, an aura in the air of, we try to tone down the happiness during that period of time. And it's hard for us to grasp, because we don't like to be told to be sad. We don't like to be told to engage that emotion. But I personally feel, and this is not, this class is not a class on 3 weeks or the 9 days or Tisha B'Av, but I personally feel that in order for us to experience happiness, experiencing exaltation, experience connection with God, we also have to experience sadness. We have to experience pain. We have to experience all these emotions in order for us to have a full life experience. It's interesting, because the way that the Talmud puts the phrase that when we go into the month of Av, we lessen our happiness, is it says, in the same way that a person lessens their happiness, lowers their level of happiness into the month of Av, so too in the month of Adar, the days leading up to Purim, we increase happiness. So the Talmud itself makes this connection between the two things. If you want to experience happiness in one part of the year, you have to experience sadness in the other part of the year. In order to be an awake person that's not numbed to their emotions, you have to be able to embrace and experience all sorts of emotion. As kind of an extension of this, my understanding is that I'm always fascinated by Alcoholics Anonymous and 12 steps and that whole process. But one of the first things, or the first step of the 12-step process, when a person's trying to reach out of an addictive, out of addiction, is to admit that they have an issue, is to embrace the fact that they have an issue. And so psychologically, there seems to be this relationship. If a person wants to climb out of the darkness that they're in, they have to open themselves up to it. They have to open themselves up to sensing and feeling and experiencing the emotions around them. So in that case, yes, these are some pretty dark verses from Kohelet. Again, we don't like to look at Kohelet in this class. We don't like to look at Kohelet as a dark book. But what I think he's doing over here is he's saying, don't be so afraid. There's something there to experience. And we call this Hevel, right? Sadness is a great case of Hevel. It's something that you're right. Most times you don't want to experience it. You don't want to have it. But there's something to get from it. There's something to achieve from it. There's something to draw out of that experience. So I think that's really what these verses are doing. So again, this verse 3, 4, 5, and 6 is they're trying to tell us that you can live a life like a stillborn, where you just never live, right? Just like the stillborn never got a chance to live. You can live a life where you just never live. You don't experience any sadness. You don't experience any pain. You don't experience any suffering. But you're going to lose out on other things. You're going to lose out on the sunshine and the ability to taste different foods, and the ability to have new experiences in life. So you can live a life where on paper, all your neighbors are going to be jealous of you, but you're never going to have satisfaction because you've closed yourself off from all experiences. And so because sadness and happiness, again, they really do work together. They work in tandem. So if you want to experience one, you have to be open to experiencing the other. So again, I think that's what the lesson here of verses number 3, 4, 5, and 6. He kind of tops this off with verse number 7. Usually we try not to push too many verses in one night, so we will end with verse number 7. It's a short one. And he says like this. And this is actually a pretty famous verse. Kol amal ha'adam lefihu. All of the work of a person, all the hard work that a person does, goes to their mouth. V'gam hanefesh lo timale. But the soul will not be filled, will not be satisfied. And I think this kind of it's a great case of our example of eating. I brought in eating before, but let me read the verse a second time. I always like to read the verse at least 2 times before I start explaining. Kol amal ha'adam lefihu. All of the hard work of a person goes to their mouth. V'gam hanefesh lo timale, but their spirit will not be filled, will not be sated. Okay, so again, the idea over here is you can have a person who stuffs their mouths. They force food down their mouths, but they never actually get full. They never get satisfied. If you're eating the wrong foods, if you're eating, from a nutrition perspective, right? If you're just eating straight carbs constantly, right? That's all you eat. Just down pasta every time you eat, you're just eating pasta. So you will feel full probably for a little bit, but it doesn't last very long. You'll be hungry pretty soon afterwards. So if you're just stuffing food down your throat, not without thinking about it, you're not even getting a chance to enjoy it. You could do that without even enjoying the food, without even getting any sort of pleasure from the food that a person's eating. So in that way, that's kind of what we're saying over here also is, again, you can live your life where, again, I think that this verse 7 is the topper. It's the cap for these previous verses. Is saying that you can put all this hard work, and at the end of the day, the hard work, you will get to physically enjoy everything you've done. Meaning, again, as I look at it on paper, you will be enjoying everything that you've done. But your spirit, that's your life force, it's not going to be satisfied. Not going to have any fulfillment from that, because, and again, the because is in the previous verses, because you're just going through motions. You're not allowing yourself to feel anything, right? And so in order for a person to feel satisfied from the food that they're eating, as the parable, right, as the allegory, in order to feel satisfaction from the food that you're eating, from the life that you're living, you need to have a little bit more forethought about what you're experiencing. And you need to open yourself up to experiences, open yourself up to feeling all the different types of feelings that you can have. And that's the way towards achieving another path towards happiness. As we've said, the big book of Kohelet, the big book of Ecclesiastes, is not a descent into darkness. It's a manual towards happiness. And so what he's saying over here is, you want to achieve happiness, here's another thing you have to do. Maybe take a little bit of time and embrace some of the darkness, some of the sadness, some of the different emotions that we have in life. Embrace all of them. Experience them as they're happening. And that way you will be able to achieve happiness too. Just as a kind of a plug, and it's not, I don't get anything from this, but if you've ever heard of Rabbi David Foreman, he's a pretty well-known teacher, online teacher. He's got his own set of courses online. His organization is called Aleph Beta, I'll put it in the comments before we sign off. But he's a great teacher, and he's got these great cartoon graphics that he teaches through, fantastic videos. But he put together a few years ago on Tisha B'Av. He put together a 6-part series. Takes about an hour and a half to watch altogether, where he really does a deep dive into this idea of experiencing both darkness and light, both happiness and sadness, and it's a fantastic thing. I'll put a link to it. Actually, let me just while we're on the share screen, I could open it up, and that's I think I got the aleph-beta.org. And again, I will actually put this in the chat also. If you don't already follow him, he's worthwhile checking out in general. He's got some great stuff, both on the weekly Torah portion and on all sorts of the topics as they come up throughout the Jewish year. But that anyway, it's now we're getting the ads anyway. But the point is, he does a very deep dive into this concept, and I think he's spot on with that. So again, that's really the general idea over here is in order for a person to achieve or to experience happiness, they have to be experiencing emotion in general. And that includes sadness. That includes feeling like you can't do things, or feeling hopeless, or feeling giddy. I mean, every emotion. You have to be able to experience the emotions that are going on in your body in order for you to achieve that singular one of happiness. That's kind of our goal. Okay, so I will stop the share now, bring us back to the main session. Okay, so again, that was chapter 6, verses 3 through 7. Okay, and we will, God willing, pick up next week.